Hey horror fans, welcome back to Room 237, coming at you with kind of a random review. I know, I still got one more Herschel Gordon Lewis film. But I was really in the mood to watch something Frankenstein. Frankenstein's monster is my favorite movie monster. To me, he is the movie monster. But I have very limited stuff with Frankenstein as of right now. I'm hoping Santa has seen how good I've been. And this is the only other film I have that I haven't reviewed yet, and that is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein from 1994. Which originally, when I bought this, I didn't buy it as part of a horror collection. I bought it as part of my Robert DeNiro collection, because Robert De Niro plays the monster. And I know that could either sound amazing or it could sound very silly. Now, what this film is back in the early 90s, Francis Ford Coppola wanted to bring us he wanted to sort of revive some of the monsters and give us the most loyal adaptations to the original novels as possible. You know, so much so that even the author's name is above the title. But also have it be epic in scope and with big stars. So in 92, he himself directed Bram Stoker's Dracula with Gary Oldman, Keanu Reeves. And I believe Winona Ryder. Is that who it was? I do have it. I haven't seen it in a while. But then in 94, he produced Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, directed by Kenneth Brannagh, and starring Kenneth Brannagh. Which, Kenneth Brannagh, back in the 90s, he was sort of the 90s equivalent of like Lawrence Oliver back in the 50s. He was the Shakespeare guy. He was the guy that directed and starred in these Oscar-winning Shakespeare adaptations. Most people know him as I stopped watching Harry Potter after a while, so it was one of the earlier ones. I believe he's the teacher that has like the memory spells from, I think, the second movie, the one that all the girls like. But anyway, he plays Victor Frankenstein. And the thing about this movie is, one, it didn't do very well. As faithful to the novel as it is, which it might be more faithful. I guess there was a TV movie around the same time called Frankenstein that is even more faithful and is even better. But, you know, going from novel to film has never been 100% accurate. And going from comic book to film has never been 100% accurate. That's for all the Snyder fans watching. In fact, the closest I've seen has been Clockwork Orange and Of Mice and Men, but I haven't seen the TV movie of Frankenstein. I'd love to. And, you know, it was written by Frank Darabont, but, you know, there was some problems with it. Like, Frank Darabont said, like, it was the best script he's ever written, but the worst movie he's ever seen. Like, I guess either they didn't really follow it, or they changed a bunch of shit. I can't really remember. But I do know Darabont, and I mean, he's the guy that wrote, you know, he wrote and directed Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile. He co-wrote Elm Street 3. He is a writer, so they didn't really follow it. But it also does have a pretty big cast. I mean, playing his friend Henry, you have the guy that played, I know him as Pinto from Animal House, But he also played Amadeus in Amadeus. He had an early role by Helena Bonham Carter as Elizabeth, playing the roles that Johnny Depp would have her do over and over and over again. Like this aristocratic kind of woman. Who else? There is a lot of people. I'm not going to go over everyone. Just the ones that stick out to me. Who was the blind man? Richard Breers? Well, he was in Henry V and Hamlet, which were Kenneth Brannagh Shakespeare films. But you also had, as the professor, who has the brain that Frankenstein wants for his monster, played by one of my personal idols, John Cleese. My favorite Python, my comedic idol, just one of my favorite people, on screen people. Love Fawlty Towers. I saw him live with, a premiere of Holy Grail. It was one of the best experiences of my life. He's in a very serious role, and he fits. He wasn't out of place. It wasn't like when Jack Black was in King Kong. Which you might even say King Kong was kind of a similar film to this. Going way back to the 30s, but, King Kong started out as a movie, I do believe. But anyway, yeah, think about this, and even the same thing with Dracula. I would say I like this movie better by default because it's Frankenstein, but Bram Stoker's Dracula might be better put together tonally. It's been a while since I've seen it, so I'd have to go back, but at 2 hours and 3 minutes, so let's call it 2 hours without end credits, it takes about almost an hour before Frankenstein starts creating the monster, like going through the whole process. Before that, it just feels like another period drama of like the 1700s. Very lighthearted. You do kind of see his descent into obsession. And there are some similarities. Yeah, even though he's in love with Elizabeth, who is his sister, his adoptive sister, he does close her and Henry off to be alone and shut in and recluse to do his experiments, whom he then shows. And, I was up so late last night and I had more turkey today, so I was dozing off during this. So one of the most important things I actually kind of missed, but that's how they got the brain. Like what happened to the professor's brain and why he had to use the criminal brain. But the brain he gets, we do see a small role played by Robert De Niro. They're giving out vaccinations, and this one criminal snaps and kills John Cleese, and then he's hanged, and that's the brain he gets. It was pretty original how, the experiment to make the monster, because in the novel it's very vague. I don't remember the novel very much. I read it when I was a kid. I read it when I was in like 6th grade. It wasn't even I got it from the school library, but it wasn't a school book. It was just something I wanted to read. I've always loved Frankenstein. It's very vague as to what the process is and what the lab looks like. It still kind of has, its electrodes and bells and whistles that the 31 film has. It does have, laid on this thing that's brought up to the sky for lightning, then brought back down. But there's also, it's almost like this tube-looking thing that he puts the monster in, with all these sticks that point into like the proper nerves or whatever to be shocked. Then it's filled with water and all these CGI electric eels, which the electric eels I don't think's ever been done before. But now let's get down to the monster, Robert De Niro. Robert De Niro is my favorite actor. He has been for a while. For a few years. He's not really known for horror. Actually, none of my top favorite actors are really horror actors. Just, as far as acting goes, Robert De Niro, Christian Bale, Al Pacino, Jack Nicholson, Tom Hardy. I would say Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi do belong in there. I just don't know where they would go. Because also, that's a whole other conversation. Is he Boris Karloff? Absolutely not. Obviously, he looks different. It feels weird seeing someone else play Frankenstein's monster, especially since I haven't seen the Hammer films yet, so I'm not used to it. But I do like the look of the monster. He starts off with, he's kind of got a lip like that. He's got two different colored eyes, like he's taken from two different people. That's kind of cool. He's got stitches everywhere, where as the film goes on, he takes the stitches out. Excuse me, takes the stitches out and he heals. But he does look like he's put together. He's bald. And De Niro does do a good job. He's intimidating and scary when he needs to be, and he's incredibly sympathetic when he needs to be, which to me, and to even Boris Karloff himself, Boris Karloff, what he wanted to accomplish was, he wanted kids to see this movie and feel sorry for the monster. And does it reach that level of both the original Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein? Especially with the blind man? No. But it still is a valiant effort. And I still think De Niro does do a pretty damn good job. When he first gets out of Frankenstein's, he wants to get food out in like the town's place, and people chase him out of town. He ends up in the woods. There's like this part where there's this farm family out in the woods who they can't farm because they can't afford the equipment and the ground is frozen. So he goes out and he pulls all the food out of the ground for them, and he leaves it for them. He lives in their barn without them knowing. They call him the spirit of the woods or the angel of the woods. Like even on Christmas they leave food out for him, and he's happy just doing that. And then one day he goes inside and there's the blind man, and the blind man talks to him, and he slowly starts to learn speech because he's wearing Frankenstein's jacket that has his journal in it. So he slowly teaches himself how to read, how to speak. And, he says, people hate me because I'm so ugly. He starts off very monosyllabically, but then he gets more and more eloquent as the film goes on. You feel bad for him. And then, of course, thing with the guys come in, they see him, they beat him out of the house. You do get a great scene where he cries in a tree afterwards, just because he's not a monster at that point. He's a being that didn't ask to be made, didn't ask to be brought to life. He just got stitched together, resurrected, and now everyone's just a total dick to him. He's got nowhere to go. He's got no purpose. So he breaks down. And it's at that point he reads the journal and realizes what he is. And he swears his revenge on Frankenstein. And then this is where it becomes more of a horror movie. And I'm going to say spoilers. I will say if you're a fan of Frankenstein, the name, definitely check it out. It's definitely worth watching just to see like what the novel was more like and see a different take on it. Obviously, I still love the Karloff version the best, but so definitely check it out. So spoilers. This is where he gets pretty ruthless. I mean, he kills Victor's like 6 or 7-year-old brother. Tells him where to meet him out in this cave in the woods. You get this cool scene where he slow-mo like jumps at him. Tells him how he crushed his neck and does the whole thing about wanting a mate. And if you don't grant my request and give me a wedding night, I'll be with you on yours. Of course, Frankenstein isn't willing to do that, so Frankenstein, I just called him Frankenstein. The monster kills his wife. Frankenstein creates her. And, I mean, this scene was pretty horrific. I mean, when she's the bride, and even she looks very different, she looks really horrific. At least with the original film with Elsa Lanchester, it's like they captured the beauty of like a monster. She has like the beauty in the face, but the rest is all messed up. Here, she's all messed up. And of course, Frankenstein still wants her, trying to get her to remember, and the monster's trying to get her to not be afraid of him, because of course she still is. They have this tug of war with her, and like the seams start coming undone. She sets herself on fire. And it all pretty much leads up to the movie's actually bookended by the late 1700s. Frankenstein is on this ship that's on a quest to the North Pole. And the captain is like a young, obsessed, driven man, like Frankenstein was. So he tells him his story. And then it gets up to that point, and the monster's after him. They hear him moan out in the distance. The dogs go after him. He kills the dogs. But when the monster finally catches up, this is when it gets kind of weird, because he swore his revenge, and he's like this. I would almost compare his Frankenstein monster in some ways to his Max Cady and Cape Fear. It's like he's trying to get across that sort of horror kind of revenge, angry vengeance, wanting to kill, will stop at nothing, kind of Cape Fear, vengeance. But it's like when he catches up and he sees that Frankenstein has died, he sort of breaks down, he accepts him as his maker and cries, goes out on a raft, sets it on fire, kills himself. And then that's when the captain's like, "Let's go home, boys." But, so, I would say totally it's pretty messed up. I mean, obviously, the original Frankenstein and Bride of, there are very, very sweet, pleasant moments and moments of sympathy and then moments of horror. It's almost hard to call Frankenstein a horror movie because it's just a monster, really. He's not doing scary things. In fact, the real monster of Bride of Frankenstein would be Dr. Pretorius, but it is still a gothic horror film. So you had different like moments of sweetness and sympathy, and then moments of horror. But it didn't feel that felt like it went together. This is just really shifting all the time. It felt more like a period piece, because Kenneth Brannagh doing the big Shakespeare films of the '90s, obviously, the set and the costumes and everything is gonna look to period, and that's what it feels like for most of the time. There are some great shots. The first time we see um, Grand Baron von Frankenstein, his father, when he comes out of that door in that big room and there's that big staircase, it looks like something from the 30s, almost like a matte painting in a film. Just a very beautiful shot, almost Kubrick-esque looking. You do get some kind of neat shots, like when his mother's giving birth to his brother, and his father has to like cut it out of her because of complications. They're doing it in this one room, and the camera pans down to where Victor and Elizabeth are, and it's raining, so it's like the water's rushing down the window as she's giving birth. And then, like his first experiment with electricity and static. Electricity shocks this thing, and they're all laying on blankets, and then they have like static coming off of them. And you get this scene with the clouds in the background of Elizabeth and Victor touching fingers like creation of Adam. You get some neat stuff like that. But, period drama, and then it felt kind of like an action film almost during the creation of the monster. Because it's raining, he's sweating, he's shirtless, but he's got his long, wavy hair, So I don't know. It's almost put together kind of like an action film, like a drama, action thriller almost. The scenes where the movie really shines is when the monster is on screen. And he doesn't really get a lot of screen time, even in the second half of the film. DeNiro does own it as the monster. Different take, but he does everything. He's incredibly sympathetic, and then he's incredibly angry and vengeful. And DeNiro does do that very well. I would say, because there's a ton of versions of Frankenstein out there. I still haven't seen the Hammer versions. I haven't seen the TV version that came out around the same time. I haven't seen that new crap Victor Frankenstein with, like, Harry Potter in it. But I would even say, like, Young Frankenstein is a better movie, even though that's a parody. I do like that more as a movie. Hell, might even say Tim Burton's Frankenweenie. I might even enjoy a little bit more than this. Because that's a parody / homage to the entire Universal monsters. Done very well. And a stop motion, which I'm a sucker for. But that's not to say this movie's bad. It doesn't deserve its 36% on Rotten Tomatoes. I thought it was a solid film. It's solid enough that it's entertaining, but it does have all the flaws that I already mentioned. And I guess if you really think about it, when you look at how faithful to the novel this one is, and then, like, you realize how different the James Whale films are, maybe there's a reason it wasn't put in those movies. Bride of is still my favorite film with the monster. The original film is still my favorite look of the monster. Those are still my two favorite films. But Mary Shelley's Frankenstein isn't a bad movie. It's a good, different incarnation of the monster. and I do recommend it. Anyway, that is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Thank you for watching.